Hello friends, welcome to my new video lecture. Before I start my video lecture today, I would like to give my outline of this lecture series which I am starting. I have named this lecture series as Glossary of Cultural Studies. I know you all have got an idea. In this lecture series, which will be of few videos, I will talk about some of the important glossaries, some of the important terms which are associated with culture studies and are very significant from the perspective of cultural studies. And this particular series will comprise a few videos, and in each video I will be talking about 4-5 important terms, and I will try to explain the etymological meaning of the words, the theoretical definitions of these words, and I will also try to explain it through what I have understood and through very easy examples. And I am sure that this lecture series on Glossary of Cultural Studies will definitely help you in understanding some of the most important glossaries in the field of cultural studies. So let us begin. And I will begin this alphabetically, this glossary. So the first word or term that I will talk about in cultural studies is acculturation. 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 What do we exactly mean by acculturation from the perspective of cultural studies? Now, acculturation, the theoretical meaning is the ability to go on in a culture, to carry on in a culture. It requires the learning and acquisition of language, values, norms through imitation, practice and experimentation. What do we mean by that? We mean that if we want to be a part of a culture and if we want to carry out as a successful entity in that culture, we should be able to understand that culture from all the perspectives necessary. That is, from the perspective of language, from the perspective of values of that culture, from the perspective of norms of that culture. Now, the concept of acculturation refers to the social processes by which we learn the knowledge and skills that enable us to be members of a culture. What do I mean by that? I give you a small example. For example, I go to McDonald's outlet for food, and at the same time I practice listening, or I enjoy listening the Backstreet Boys. So this is a very good example of acculturation, that I, being an Indian, having a different set of values, trying to adapt the Western culture, and in the process I'm trying to adapt their food, their music, and this is an example which I will try to explain more. What are the agents, if we talk of acculturation, what are the key agents that plays a very significant role if one needs to be accultured in a particular family, in a particular society? The key agents are family, the peer groups, the group of the friends, families, colleagues, schools, work organization, and of course the media. Now, the argument that the cultural studies people give is that a person requires the process of acculturation, this is a central argument that the cultural studies people give, that if you want to be a part of the culture, you have to be through the process of acculturation. So acculturation, the important agents that plays a very significant role in acculturation, as I said, is family, peer group, schools, media, work organization, and so on. Now, there are two kinds of acculturation. I give you an example. Suppose I am a Bengali in Bengal, but there is somebody who is not a Bengali but living in Bengal and turns out to be a Bengali because that person knows the language, the food, the culture, the value of the Bengali society. So this is one of the forms of acculturation. The second form of acculturation is when that is forced. For example, when Calcutta was the center, the capital of India, there was a group of people who were made to forcefully learn the language, adapt the British language, adapt the English language, adapt the English culture, which was forced on them by the Britishers. So this forcing of one country on the other is also a form of acculturation. I can also give the example of the Francophone African world, where many African countries where the workings of those countries for a very large extent of time was done through French, and there was a lot of French cultures practiced in those countries, because those countries were colonized by the French. So I hope I'm able to give you an understanding of acculturation. Acculturation basically are of two types. One is forced acculturation, and one is acculturation which you imbibe. I gave you the example of a non-Bengali staying in Calcutta and becoming a Bengali through food, through the knowledge of food, culture and the various norms and societies. And the forced culture, I gave the example of the Britishers forcing their culture on Bengal when on Calcutta, when Calcutta was the capital of India. Now, before I end, I would like to sum up what acculturation did we understand. Acculturation simply refers to the social processes that includes, of course, language, food, values, norms, and etc. The social processes by which we learn the language and skills and knowledge that enable us to be a member of a culture. That is called acculturation. So in order to be a member of a culture, which definitely we all are, that is what the cultural critics and the studies people gave, that we all go through a process of acculturation. Now the second concept which I'll talk is, the second important glossary in the field of cultural studies is articulation. What do we mean by articulation? Now, according to Hall, articulation, the concept of articulation suggests a temporary unit of discursive elements that do not have to go together, so that an articulation is in the form of connection that can make a unity of two different elements under certain conditions. This is important, that unity of two different elements under certain conditions is one of the major aspects of articulation. Now, what do we mean by that? Now, the concept of articulation has been used to theorize the relationship between two discursive elements or components of a social formation. What do I mean by that? I mean this particular, before I explain in a simple term, let us first understand that this particular concept of articulation is premised on the argument that was put forward by Ernesto Laclau. Laclau said that there are no necessary links between discursive concepts or between the levels of a social formation, and that those which are forged are of a temporary nature, being articulated and bound together by customs and conventions. So it's basically two different discursive elements which are brought together, and that bringing together is temporary. You will more understand when I speak. I'll give you an example. Let us talk the theory part first. Then the concept of articulation enables apparently unifying concepts such as society or nation to be considered as unique historically, specifically temporary stabilizations of relations and meanings. What do we mean by that? I mean, you can take the example of India. Two discursive elements. India is a very good example where we have different cultures, different language, and in every there's a proverb, in every 100 miles changes the language, culture, food, habit. So discursive elements, two different elements, food, culture, norms, values, they are brought together under an umbrella term called India. So to all the different states, bringing of the all different states under an umbrella term which is India. That is one of the ways which I can explain the different discursive elements bringing together concept. By mind you, cultural this articulation talks about temporary unification. So from that temporary unification, India is not an example. All the states coming together temporarily. No, that is not. What I want to explain to you is the discursive elements, different elements which are brought together. That bringing together, I am talking about example of India, not the temporary part. Temporary part, if you take India, is absolutely a wrong thing. So if I conclude what is articulation, it refers to the connection that can make two different elements under certain conditions, they can unite together. That is also an example of articulation. Now comes the third concept in the field of cultural studies, that is city, the concept of city. Now, the growth of a contemporary city is an aspect of the urbanization process. We all know that, inherent within modernity, of course, and with the associated culture of modernism. This is we all understand by that. And one of the particular interest for cultural studies has been cultural studies people, they have divided from the field of cultural studies, divided the concept of city into three categories. One is the inner city, second is the postmodern city, and the third is the global city. That is how they define the concept in three categories. The first is the inner city, the second is the postmodern city, and the third is the global city. Now, what is the inner city that this cultural studies talks about? The modern Anglo-American society has been commonly understood in terms of zones that expand radically from the center and which are inhabited by particular types or classes of people. A city which expands, and there are zones within the city where it has been demarcated that a particular group of people, economic group or a social group, they stay together in a particular zone. That zoning concept is the inner city concept, and in effect these various social groups are they are allocated special residential zones by income selection. So these zones are divided according to the income selection of the people within a city. You can take a very good example, that of Mumbai. In Mumbai you have zones, C-Link belonging to the very high rich class people, where you have Dharavi just before the landing of the aeroplane takes place. All those blue sheet covers you see when the plane is landing in the Mumbai International Airport. Though that area is called Dharavi. Dharavi is called the lifeline of Mumbai because all the economically service people who provide service to this rich class of C-Link and all those people, they stay in Dharavi. So the economically weaker people who are providing an impetus to the economically strong people, they are staying in that particular weaker section of the society which are underprivileged, and they are given the name of Dharavi. So this zoning concept within a city, this zone where economically you are divided, is called the inner city. And there are certain aspects which are added to these zones. What are the aspects? It has become a common place that to discuss the inner city, when you talk of inner city, you talk about a poor, non-white zone of people. In India, it can be considered to be a poor people where the basic amenities of life and things are missing, and these are predominantly inhabited by the economically poor sections of the society. So that is the concept of inner city. In popular imagination, these are dangerous places of gang wars. This concept has been developed that this economically there'll be all bad people living in those people, in that economically poor zone that I gave you the example of Dharavi, which is not the case, but it has been divided. And this is a popular imagination, and of course that's why we are using the word imagination. It's a popular imagination, and imaginations are wrong. Of course, it's a construct that has been done. And how the popular imagination is this, that these are dangerous places where there are gang wars, drug abuse, crime, that is emerged as a sign of intensified social polarization. Of course, this I agree completely, including the abandonment of an underclass to mass employment, drug trafficking, poverty and homelessness. Completely agree with all these later points. So I gave you the example, one of some example of the inner city in Indian perspective is Dharavi in Mumbai. Now, what is the second concept? That is the postmodern city. According to some writers, most nobly the writer called Soja, major changes has taken place in cities during the last quarter of the 20th century, of course, and that can be described as postmodern. So if you look the postmodern city, a very good example of postmodern city is Los Angeles. Thus, what happens is, why I give you the example of Los Angeles, because Soja has seen that in the last quarter there has been a tremendous shift. What happens is, thus the deindustrialization and the industrialization in the context of a global economy, the deindustrialization and the industrialization in the context of the global economy has shifted the economic base of the city towards a combination of high technology industries and low skill. labor intensive, design sensitive. Of course, there are many parts in your own city. You will find the 50-60 years older part of the city was much more economically vibrant, but now there has been a shift. Generally now the shift is towards that part of the city where you have all the services that are needed for the running of an industry. Of course, that city is an industrialized city, where there is a cheap abundance of labor, where there is a cheap electricity, where there is abundance of water, and there is okay kind of connection of roads. This shifting has taken place in the last quarter, and the restructuring of this urban economy is implicated in new patterns of social fragmentation, of course, segregation and polarization, marked by an enlarging managerial technology, a shrinking middle class, and a growing base of the homeless people, welfare dependents, and cheap labor. That's why I give the example of Los Angeles, which is a very good example of postmodern city. Now in Los Angeles, you will see this Los Angeles is marked by the rise of the hyper reality and simulacra, courtesy not only of the Hollywood or the Disneyland, not only because of this, but also because of the spin doctors, virtual reality, cyberspace, sound bites, and pop culture. All these together, developing the concept of postmodern city. Now we go to the third concept of the city from the cultural perspective, that is the cultural studies perspective, that is the global city. What is global city? This is very significant and very interesting, and very interesting for us to understand. What is global city? Basically, global city, underpinning the concept of the global city is the sense that the urban world economy is dominated. The urban world economy is dominated by a very small number of cities or centers which act as a commanding center and place, and they control the points of a very increasing dispersed set of economic activities. These small command centers, in particular the capitalist corporations, are sensitive to questions of location and their relative advantage. Of course, they select these parts which control the whole world. And how are these parts selected? I told you, they select these particular cities where you have cheap labor, you have the union is not very strong, the workers union, and there are tax exemptions, and these lead to this capitalist kind of people to favor some places over other places of location for developing and establishing of plants, markets, and development. And similarly, there is the need to find alternative forms of investment and particular conditions of markets and state intervention assess some of the sectors of the economy. And the some places in these are the factors why these small places, they govern the whole world. These small centers, they govern the whole world. I give you the example, very pertinent examples of the global contemporary cities are London, New York, Tokyo, Seoul, Los Angeles, Frankfurt, Paris, Singapore. These are a very small group of cities which dominate the whole world. They have significance not because of the population size or volume of business, but why they are significant is because of the key personnel and activities that are located within them. And that is, they are the sites. Why they are very important? Because they are the sites of accumulation, they are the sites of distribution, and they are the sites of circulation of what? Of capital, where information and decision making functions are more than the tailing size. Why? Because all the capitalist people, they find these places, they search these places, and they mark these places as significant, which can be useful to them because they are providing those friendly things which they need. I told you, the working, especially the union, there's less union groups, workers groups, so that the capitalists, they can set up these centers. And these centers, I gave you some of the examples: London, New York, Paris, Tokyo, Los Angeles, Singapore, Frankfurt. They act as the centers. This small group of people, they act as the centers in governing the whole world. So this is what the concept of city talks about. So in this particular video, what I did was I tried to make you understand the three basic concepts of cultural studies. The first concept was acculturation, the second concept was articulation, and the third concept of city. Now in that city we had three concepts. One was the concept of inner city, the second was the concept of postmodern city, and the third was the concept of global city. So as I told you all that this is a lecture series. I will be speaking a lot about many important more terms from the field of cultural studies, and I fervently hope that this lectures of mine, this lecture series will definitely help you in clearing some of the doubts, because as I told you, I will try to explain in my simple language, providing you of course the theoretical concepts. I will try to give you simple examples so that we can try to understand the concepts which sometimes are hazy, we are not able to understand, and I will try my level best to make you all understand. That is what is my objective of creating and making these videos. And before I end, I just like to ask you all, request you all that if you all like my video, please do subscribe my YouTube channel. Your subscription will matter a lot to me. That will give me that energy to go on, and will strengthen my belief that I have made a right decision of creating this YouTube channel. May God bless you all. Have a blast. May God bless you all. This is Dr. Soikot Banerjee signing off for today. Have a very good night. Thank you very much.